we can really take anything and boil it down to the warp and the weft, you know? Like when you talk about space-time, it's always referred to as the fabric of space-time. You know, there's all of these like scientific explanations that use fabric and woven cloth, just to make sense of them. So I think that the cloth, the warp and the weft really are the basis of the way the world is made. It is a really amazing history of all of these female artists, like, you know, Annie Albers and Sheila Hicks and all these women who came up using textiles. And I'm also really excited about, like, how can we take these things from the past and these ways of making these techniques and then push them towards the future. So I'm really interested in, like, weaving innovation and, you know, new material development. So I work a lot with different, what I call future fibers and things that are a little more experimental and kind of try to push the weaving conversation out of the craft history and into a future that's like a little bit more programmed, like looking at weaving as kind of computer technology, because really the looms are the very first computers. And I don't know, I think perhaps it speaks to just like working together, or the way that one thing can't stand alone. A warp can't stand alone without a weft, you know, it's just a bunch of strings. But there's like this, the movement and the interaction between the two that create all these intersections. I don't know, it creates a lot of opportunity, and then what belongs inside those intersections is what you're really deciding when you're designing a weave or when you're programming a new software, you know. I have this cabin that I'm building. I started building it when I lived in New York City, and I would come back to Montana in the summers because I just needed this space to to like experience solitude and to have quietness. And I had this vision that, you know, if only we had a space to kind of escape and be alone, we could be so much more productive and creative. And it's funny, now that I'm in Montana, I don't believe in that anymore. Like, I don't believe in the myth of the artist alone in the cabin, like solitude and silence. And I'm so much more interested in working with people and being around collaborators and part of something that's way bigger than just myself. So there's definitely a push and a pull with that, and maybe it has a lot to do with geography, but I'm really interested in natural materials and natural fibers. So I do a lot of foraging for plant material, and a lot of like walking around and just being interested in what is this and how can I use it in my practice, you know, which has led me to milkweed, which is a big part of my my textile practice in lots of different ways. But specifically, I'm interested in how it's buoyant, and I think it kind of is, it's magic. It floats, you know, so I can weave these rugs that are full of milkweed, and then I can like let them loose in a body of water and watch this handmade rug just like levitate on top of the water. And it's kind of these moments that of like disbelief or magic that I am really interested in, and they're all kind of traced back to material and like what are the material qualities that can make something perform in a way that that feels really special. I think when I say magic, what I'm getting at is this sense of wonder, or this like insatiable curiosity of how does that work, and perhaps the idea that question can't be answered, you know, when you see something that you just don't quite understand or that you're really surprised by. It just draws you in.
And where do you find, or how do you find yourself ending up in that state of mind? How do you arrive at it? Or when does it show up? Or
that's a great question. I will hope for my life that it shows up all the time, but you know, so much of it seems to be like your willingness to accept that. yeah, also I think it focuses in on like what is the lifetime of a thing. So,
right.
you know, when I'm just looking over here and seeing these like pieces of lichen, those are weavings made out of lichen that I spun into yarn and wove them with like rope that I found washed up on the beach in Maine. And just kind of thinking of like how long that plastic is going to be around for, like forever. So instead of it being garbage, how about it could be art? If you remove it from one context and put it into another one, you're like able to give it a new life, because textiles are not, they aren't preserved in the archaeological record almost at all, you know, but there's some of the earliest, there's evidence that there's some of the earliest, you know, ways of making things, but they're not around like pottery or a stone carving, you know, which gives them this ephemeral quality. And I think it speaks again a lot to women's work in the way that it disappears and is unnoticed, purely because of the challenges with preservation. Or we don't have much evidence that women were great thinkers, because we don't have their writing, which kind of pushes them away when we look at the context of, you know, history. But it wasn't that they weren't great thinkers or great inventors or great artists. It's just that we don't have the record of that. You know, dreaming up a piece of clothing I wanted to make or I wanted to have, and then I would figure out how to make it. And I've sewn so many horrible things, you know, just like, because I never really learned how to do it the right way. I always just figured it out myself. My approach to making has always been pretty stubborn, like still is, like even like cooking something, I'll like glance at a recipe, but then I'll be like, I'm just gonna make it up, you know. I hate following directions, I hate rules. So there's something good about teaching myself, because I can learn from my own mistakes and kind of figure out, do all the problem solving myself. I find a lot of joy in that, and frustration. I think there's some people in my life that I really admire, and they're the ones who live their artwork. Like who every day what they wear and their routine is like so dialed into their creative practice, and I'm like always kind of striving for that. But the follow through on that is really something else. You know? Like I mean sometimes I really like to approach my life like it's performance art, for sure, especially when you're trying to cope with kind of the absurd things that are happening. You know, I had a job once where I worked in a factory, and it was this horrible, oppressive working conditions, and but I was really into Bruce Springsteen at the time, and I was really into this idea of just like being like a really blue collar American worker, factory worker. So I was able to kind of frame that really tough part in my life as an art project, where I would, you know, wear the same jeans and white shirt every day, and like bought a car and like pack my lunch the day ahead, or like the night ahead of going to work. And I did all these things that are really just normal. I was trying really hard to just be normal in this way that felt like it was a performance. But it was just my normal life. But when a piece takes, you know, a few months to make, I lose interest in the first idea by the time I'm halfway through, so then it morphs into something else, and then or you're dyeing yarn and you know you run out of dye and you have a new dye lot, and so there's this brush, there's this like different tone of color, and it just shows the evidence of the time taken. Really, I definitely am not into perfection, and I'm much more interested in chance. I will not unweave something to take away a mistake, you know, because I think, you know, the Amish quilters always put in one block opposite, because they say only God is perfect. So I think there's a beautiful thing in the handmade aspects of work that show your flaws. I think that your format actually is really interesting because it's these kind of long pieces. And my perception of your project is really that your approach is unique because you're trying to hold space for longer than, like, you know, the average short attention span. You know, to produce a 20-minute video is kind of insane. You know, no one watches 20-minute videos like with their full attention. No one does. So I was immediately drawn to your project because I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity to not just like say the greatest hits, like, you know, everyone wants
cut it like that.
Everyone wants to ask you, you know, kind of the same things, which means they know what you're gonna say. I think that what's digestible, what's like really easily digestible when you're talking to someone is often just like it's so meaningless, and it's kind of like